In-depth analysis of the Great Stagnation and Abenomics, lessons from Japan. Captivating opening, the mystery of the lost 30 years. Why did a nation that created an economic miracle fall into a 30-year slump? The Great Stagnation and Abenomics, Lessons from Japan, written by Japanese economist Masazumi Wakabate, offers an authoritative perspective on decoding Japan's lost 30 years. Reveals how Abenomics attempted to break the deadlock and why it failed to fully reverse the decline. This book is not only a history of Japan's economy but also a mirror reflecting the future of the global economy. Today, let's dive into this turbulent history, exploring how Japan sought a way out of the fog and the wisdom we can draw from it. Chapter 1: From Miracle to Fog, the Peak and Fall of Japan's Economy. Japan was once a global economic legend. In the 1980s, Tokyo's land prices could have bought all of California, and Japanese manufacturing, led by Toyota and Sony, dominated the world. But in the early 1990s, the bubble economy collapsed, marking the start of the lost 30 years. Masazumi Wakabate writes, Japan's economy was like a high-speed train that slammed on the brakes, plunging into prolonged stagnation. This high-speed train metaphor captures not only the economic halt, but also the crisis of confidence that swept Japanese society. The 1980s were Japan's golden era, with its economic model hailed globally as a success. Sony and Panasonic were not just manufacturers, but cultural ambassadors, showcasing Japan's technological prowess and work ethic. Yet, the early 1990s bubble collapse shattered this confidence. The Nikkei index's crash was not just a financial event but a symbol of a crisis in the post-war economic miracle. Companies that thrived on speculative investments faced insolvency, with shockwaves hitting every corner of society. Take Hiroshi Tanaka, an employee at a mid-sized electronics firm in Osaka. In 1989, his company expanded aggressively with low-interest loans and soaring stock prices, and employees enjoyed hefty bonuses. Tanaka confidently bought a suburban home. But by 1993, the company faced financial distress, leading to layoffs and pay cuts. Tanaka's family had to cut back, and their quality of life plummeted. This personal story reflects the bubble's broader impact on ordinary families. More broadly, the bubble's collapse exposed the fragility of Japan's economic model. Financial liberalization fueled excessive leverage, amplifying asset price swings. The yen's appreciation after the 1985 Plaza Accord weakened export competitiveness. The banking system's bad debt crisis further choked credit to the real economy. Social attitudes shifted as falling housing prices and job insecurity led consumers to cut spending and companies to reduce investment. This vicious cycle trapped Japan in prolonged stagnation, highlighting the need for structural reform. Cultural factors also deepened the crisis. Japan's collectivism and risk-averse traditions led firms and individuals to favor conservative strategies, stifling innovation and resource reallocation. For example, many small and medium-sized enterprises collapsed, unable to adapt to global competition, while large firms, reliant on government protection, lacked reform momentum. Wakabate's analysis shows that Japan's stagnation stemmed not just from policy failures but from a dual constraint of culture and economic structure. This complex backdrop set the stage for Abenomics, but also foreshadowed its challenges. During this period, housing prices plummeted by 70%, and the Nikkei index fell from 38,915 to under 8,000. A wave of corporate bankruptcies swept the nation. Behind the stagnation lay intricate structural issues. The real estate bubble was fueled by 1982's financial liberalization and low-interest policies, with excessive borrowing inflating asset prices. The 1985 Plaza Accord forced the yen to appreciate, hammering export competitiveness. In 1991, the Bank of Japan's rate hikes burst the bubble, and banks were mired in bad debts. Ordinary families like the Takahashis suffered. In 1989, the Takahashi couple bought a Tokyo apartment at a high price, but after the bubble burst, its value halved, leaving them with crushing loan payments and forcing them to cut expenses. At a deeper level, Japan faced structural economic challenges. An aging population shrank the labor force, with the working-age population dropping by about 10 million from the early 1990s to 2020. Corporate innovation lagged, and the revered lifetime employment system restricted labor mobility. SMEs struggled to adapt to global competition. Wakabate notes, Japan's stagnation wasn't just a policy misstep but a dual shackle of structure and culture. This laid the groundwork for Abenomics. Chapter 2. The Deflation Trap, the core of the lost 30 years. Deflation is Japan's chronic disease, Wakabate writes. By the mid-1990s, prices were falling steadily, leading consumers to delay purchases and firms to cut investment, creating a vicious cycle. In 1998, Japan's consumer price index CPI turned negative, a trend that persisted for nearly 20 years. Deflation not only eroded economic vitality but reshaped social attitudes, with people favoring saving over spending and youth losing faith in the future. Take Erin Takahashi, who ran a small clothing store in Tokyo. During the bubble era, her shop thrived, but by the 2000s, customers delayed purchases expecting lower prices, leading to inventory pileups and her store's closure. Erin's story reflects deflation's widespread impact. Low consumption cut business revenues, triggering layoffs and wage stagnation, further curbing demand. Wakabate cites data. From 1997 to 2012, Japan's nominal GDP was nearly flat, and real wages fell by about 10%. Deflation's roots lay in failed monetary policy. The Bank of Japan kept rates near zero, but failed to stimulate the economy as firms and households lacked borrowing appetite. Bad debts in the banking system blocked funds from reaching innovative sectors. Wakabate explains, deflation is not just an economic phenomenon but a self-reinforcing cycle of psychology and expectations. Deflation's psychological impact became entrenched in Japanese society, altering consumption and investment behavior. Falling prices led consumers to expect even lower prices, delaying non-essential purchases. This further suppressed demand, cutting corporate revenues and leading to wage and investment reductions. Take Keiko Yamada, a Tokyo bookstore owner. Her shop thrived in the early 1990s, but by the 2000s, customers bought less, expecting cheaper prices, causing inventory pileups and her store's closure. Yamada's story mirrors deflation's broad impact on SMEs. Data underscores deflation's severity. From 1997 to 2012, Japan's nominal GDP grew at just 0.2% annually, far below the global average. Real wages dropped by about 10%, eroding household purchasing power. Young people like Ryo Sato faced unstable job markets and high taxes, growing pessimistic and favoring saving over spending. This deflationary mindset deepened the economic slump. Monetary policy's failure was central to the deflation trap. The Bank of Japan's near-zero rates and 2001 quantitative easing had limited impact. Pessimism about economic prospects curbed borrowing, and bank bad debts blocked funds from innovative sectors. Wakabate notes that deflation was not just economic, but a self-reinforcing social psychology. At a deeper level, Japan's financial system was a factor. In the early 1990s, banks accumulated bad debts from real estate loan defaults, weakening their balance sheets and limiting credit supply. Government bailouts stabilized the system, but favored large banks and firms, leaving SMEs with limited support. For example, a small Hokkaido manufacturer went bankrupt in 1998 due to lack of loans, leaving hundreds jobless. This uneven resource allocation widened economic disparities, with large firms recovering while SMEs struggled. Deflation was also tied to Japan's social structure. Lifetime employment restricted labor mobility, hindering human resources from shifting to emerging industries. In the 1990s, as IT and internet economies boomed globally, Japanese firms, tied to traditional industries, missed transformation opportunities. For instance, NEC and Fujitsu led in hardware but lagged in software and services, overtaken by US competitors. This innovation gap intensified deflationary pressures, setting a high bar for Abenomics' monetary and fiscal policies. This trap became the core challenge Abenomics aimed to tackle. Chapter 3. Abenomics' Three Arrows, an ambitious bid to break the stalemate. In 2012, Shinzo Abe returned as Prime Minister, launching Abenomics with its three arrows to end the lost 30 years. Wakabate dissects these arrows: aggressive monetary easing, flexible fiscal policy, and structural reforms. First arrow: monetary easing. Bank of Japan Governor Haruhiko Kuroda launched unprecedented quantitative easing QE, buying bonds and ETFs to inject massive liquidity, aiming for 2% inflation. In 2013, the bank's balance sheet expanded rapidly, with money supply growing by about 30%. Yen depreciation boosted exports, with firms like Toyota seeing a 7% export rise in 2014. Wakabate quotes Kuroda, "Monetary policy is the first step to breaking deflationary expectations." Second arrow, fiscal stimulus. Abe's government boosted public investment in infrastructure and post-disaster reconstruction, with the 2013 fiscal deficit reaching 8% of GDP. Tokyo Olympic preparations also drove growth. For example, construction firm Shimizu Corporation saw 15% revenue growth in 2015 from Olympic projects. Fiscal policy lifted employment, with unemployment falling to a 20-year low of 2.2%. Third arrow, structural reforms. This arrow targeted long-term issues like rigid labor markets and inefficient corporate governance. Abe promoted female employment, womanomics, joined the TPP, and encouraged corporate transparency. However, structural reforms faced resistance from traditional interest groups like agricultural cooperatives and corporate alliances. Abenomics aimed to restore Japan's economic vitality, but the three arrows had mixed results. Monetary easing injected liquidity, with the Bank of Japan's balance sheet growing 40% from 2013 to 2015. Yen depreciation aided exporters, with Honda's 2014 export revenue rising 8% and profit margins improving. However, liquidity often flowed to financial markets rather than the real economy, boosting stocks and asset prices, but not consumption. Fiscal stimulus had short-term success. Infrastructure and post-2011 earthquake reconstruction drove demand, with public investment rising from 6% to 8% of GDP in 2013, creating about 500,000 jobs. A northeastern construction firm saw 12% revenue growth in 2014 from rebuilding projects. But fiscal stimulus raised public debt, with Japan's debt-to-GDP ratio exceeding 240% in 2015, the highest among developed nations, limiting long-term fiscal space. Structural reform was the most challenging arrow. Womanomics policies, like expanding childcare and extending parental leave, aimed to boost labor participation. Yet cultural barriers limited impact. Many women, like Osaka's Mika Yamamoto, left full-time jobs due to family duties and workplace bias. Female employment rose but fell short of goals. TPP opened markets for exporters, but agricultural cooperatives' opposition curbed reform depth. Corporate governance reforms also lagged, with traditional insider control slowing decision-making. For example, Toshiba's 2015 accounting scandal exposed systemic governance flaws. Wakabate notes that structural reforms struggled to balance short-term stimulus with long-term change, facing resistance from entrenched interests. Abenomics also faced global headwinds. The 2010s saw global growth slow, with China's rise pressuring Japan's exporters. In 2015, China's consumer electronics market share grew, squeezing Japanese firms. Abe's TPP strategy aimed to counter this, but complex negotiations limited short-term gains. These internal and external challenges dimmed Abenomics' ambitions. Chapter 4: A Fleeting Dawn, Abenomics' Short-Term Successes. From 2013 to 2015, Abenomics delivered notable results, a brief light in the lost 30 years. Wakabate writes, Abenomics was like a shot of adrenaline, briefly reviving a dormant economy. The stock market soared, with the Nikkei index doubling from 9,000 in 2012 to 20,000 in 2015. Corporate profits rose, with listed firms' net profits up 20% in 2014. Panasonic, for instance, turned losses into a 120 billion yen profit in 2013, driven by yen depreciation and export growth. Ordinary families felt the change. Kenta Yamamoto, an Osaka factory worker, received his first raise in a decade, easing household budgets. The job market shone, with female employment rising from 60% in 2012 to 66% in 2016, partly due to womanomics policies like extended parental leave and more childcare. Unemployment hit historic lows, and labor shortages raised wages in some sectors. But Wakabate cautions, these gains were largely short-term effects of monetary and fiscal stimulus, leaving deeper issues untouched. Abenomics' early success masked deeper complexities. The stock market boom and profit recovery fueled optimism, with 2014 seeing record foreign investment in Japanese stocks. However, this reflected liquidity from monetary easing, not fundamental economic gains. For example, SoftBank's 2014 market surge relied on overseas investments, not domestic innovation. Job market gains were promising, with female employment boosted by policy and labor shortages. By 2015, Japan's working-age population fell to 80 million, forcing firms like retailer Aeon to hire more elderly and foreign workers, with non-traditional labor reaching 15% of its workforce in 2016. Yet wage growth was modest, with real wages up just 1% from 2013 to 2016, far below inflation targets, and consumption remained weak. SMEs had mixed outcomes. Some, like Osaka's Yamamoto Manufacturing, turned profitable with export orders, but many face financing and demand challenges. In 2014, about 8,000 SMEs went bankrupt annually, reflecting uneven recovery. Abenomics also sparked inequality debates. Monetary easing inflated asset prices, benefiting the wealthy. Tokyo's luxury real estate rose 10% in 2015, while ordinary families faced heavier housing burdens. Consumption tax hikes exacerbated this, with low-income families like Keiko, Yamada's cutting daily expenses. This growing inequality foreshadowed policy challenges. Chapter 5: Unresolved Challenges, The Limits of Abenomics. Despite early gains, Abenomics failed to fundamentally reverse the lost 30 years. Wakabate notes that monetary easing boosted stocks and exports, but missed the 2% inflation target. From 2013 to 2019, Japan's CPI grew only 0.5% annually, with deflationary expectations entrenched. The 2014 consumption tax hike from 5% to 8% shrank retail sales by 3%, costing businesses like Aaron Takahashi's clothing store. Structural reforms lagged further. TPP opened markets, but domestic agricultural reforms stalled amid farmer protests. Labor market reforms fell short, with lifetime employment, limiting talent mobility. Wakabate cites Koichi Hamada. Structural reform was Abenomics' weak point, facing far greater resistance than expected. An aging population intensified challenges. By 28% of Japan's population was over 65, with social security costs at 12% of GDP, crowding out fiscal space. Young people like Masaki Sato, a Tokyo freelancer, struggled with high taxes and low wages, unable to plan for the future. These structural issues were beyond monetary or fiscal fixes. Abenomics' limits became clear by the mid-2010s. Monetary easing failed to break deflation, with 2019 core CPI at just 0.4%. The consumption tax hikes in 2014 and 2019 to 10% shrank spending, with Nagoya retailer Naoki Suzuki reporting a 5% sales drop in 2019, leading to layoffs. Structural reform stagnation capped economic potential. Agricultural reform stalled due to local opposition, with Hokkaido farmers protesting TPP's impact in 2016, forcing government subsidies that weakened reform. Labor market changes face cultural resistance, with firms like Fujitsu seeing only 5% uptake in a 2017 voluntary severance plan. An aging population was unavoidable. By 2020, Japan's over 65 population reached 36 million, with pension costs eating a third of the budget. Young people like Masaki Sato delayed life plans like marriage due to economic pressures, curbing consumption. Global shifts added complexity. By 2018, South Korea's Samsung outpaced Japanese firms in semiconductors. Abe's AI and robotics investments lagged behind global pacesetters like Silicon Valley. External risks, like 2018 US-China trade tensions, hit Japan's export-driven economy, with Toyota's North American sales down 3% in 2019. These factors highlighted Abenomics' limits in a globalized world. Chapter 6: A Global Mirror, Lessons from Japan's Experience. Japan's lost 30 years is not just its own lesson but a mirror for the global economy. Wakabate writes, Japan's experience is a textbook for tackling deflation and aging. Europe's 2010 second debt crisis, with Greece and others facing deflation, echoed Japan, and the ECB's quantitative easing had limited success. German economist Hans Wernerson remarked, Japan's deflation lesson shows monetary policy can't replace structural change. For individuals, Japan's story stresses adapting to economic shifts. Silicon Valley programmer James Lin pivoted to AI after the 2008 crisis, thriving in a new industry. Japanese youth are following suit, moving into digital economies and startups. At a societal level, Japan's failures underscore the urgency of reform. Firms must break rigid models and embrace innovation. Governments must balance short-term stimulus with long-term planning. Wakabate writes, Japan's lesson is that short-term fixes only buy time. Lasting prosperity requires root-level change. Japan's experience offers global insights. Deflation shows monetary policy provides temporary liquidity but not structural solutions. Europe's 2010 seconds experience, with Italy stuck in low growth despite the ECB's €1.1 trillion asset purchases, confirms this, with 2019 inflation at just 1.2%. Japan's corporate lesson is clear: over-reliance on old models cost firms like Rakuten global reach compared to Amazon. Silicon Valley's Google and Apple, by contrast, thrived on continuous R&D. For individuals, adaptability is key. James Lin's pivot to AI highlights the value of upskilling in fields like AI or blockchain. Japanese youth are embracing this, with startups like Mercari, a second-hand trading platform, reaching 50 million users by 2020. Governments must balance short and long-term goals. Singapore's Skills Future program, with 60% participation among over 40 workers in 2020, outpaces Japan's reskilling efforts, which cover less than 20%. International cooperation, like TPP, shows open markets benefit SMEs, as Vietnam's 15% export growth in 2018 proved, unlike Japan's reform struggles. These lessons offer a roadmap for addressing low growth and aging globally. Chapters Out of the Fog, a guide for individuals and society. The lost 30 years is not just Japan's past but a metaphor for the global future. How should we act amid uncertainty? Wakabate doesn't give direct answers but offers direction through his analysis. For individuals, continuous learning is critical. Like James Lin, investing in high-demand skills like data analysis or green tech builds resilience. Second, balance rational consumption and saving. In deflation, delaying spending worsens stagnation, but supporting local businesses can spark demand. Finally, maintain mental resilience. Young Japanese like Masaki Sato rebuild confidence through side hustles and community engagement. For society, firms must prioritize innovation and flexibility. Startups like Mercari activated consumption via second-hand trading platforms. Governments should advance education and labor reforms, like Singapore's skills training, to prepare workers for new economies. International cooperation, as seen in TPP, shows open markets create SME opportunities. Wakabate's closing words resonate. Japan's 30 years were both a failure and a trial. Emerging from the fog takes courage and wisdom. His conclusion guides not just Japan, but the global community. Individuals must upskill to stay competitive. Tokyo programmer Ken Nakamura, for instance, learned data analysis and switched from manufacturing to tech, boosting his salary 30% in 2021. Such adaptability is vital in uncertain times. Consumption habits need adjustment. Excessive saving and deflation deepens stagnation, but moderate spending, like Japan's 2020 Go to Travel campaign, lifted hotel occupancy by 20%. At the societal level, firms must innovate. Japanese startup Preferred Networks, valued at $2 billion in 2021, shows AI's potential in smart manufacturing. Governments should reform education, like Finland, where 80% of graduates have digital skills. International examples, like the EU's €80 billion Horizon 2020 R&D investment, boosted tech competitiveness. Japan could regain vitality by investing in startups and green tech. Wakabate's core lesson is that, for individuals and society, proactive change is the only path forward. Courage and wisdom are the keys to emerging from the fog and building a resilient global economic future. Whether individual or society, facing change requires adaptability and innovation. Let's draw strength from Japan's lessons to embrace our own future.